Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this lovely spring morning. I'm delighted to be doing this seminar or webinar with Glasgow Chamber of Commerce and my colleague Ingrid. Just a few brief words before we start. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Claire McCracken and I'm a corporate partner at Weightmans Solicitors based in Glasgow, and I'm also the regional office head for Scotland. I say I'm based in Glasgow. At the moment, I'm not, obviously, like most people, and I think I've been in the office 4 times in the past year. So it does seem quite apt that today's seminar is about a return to the workplace. Since the start of the pandemic as a firm, we've had to adapt like most businesses, and we've managed to bring together 8 of our UK offices to basically service our clients from home. Many of our offices were, in fact, agile working before the pandemic, but some of us weren't. So it's been quite an interesting time in many ways. And as the vaccination rollout continues to gather pace and case numbers and hospitalizations decline, there is now talk and hope of a return to the workplace, albeit at different paces according to where we're based in the 4 nations. So this will obviously have a great many implications for employers and businesses alike. Many businesses haven't really had employees in their workplace for the best part of a year now, or even slightly longer. So there are lots of implications that they have to give consideration to. And Ingrid will go through some of these today, both from a legal and a practical perspective, which will hopefully help some of you along the way in getting people back safely to the workplace, which I think is what we all want to do in whatever form that may be. So before I hand over to Ingrid, just a few words about the process today. If people could ask questions through the chat function, please, on Zoom at the bottom of your screen, that would be great. And what we propose to do is we'll just hold questions until the very end. I'll keep my eye on them. And then when Ingrid has finished, I think she's got about half an hour or so to talk and some slides to go through with you all. We'll address questions, and if we can't answer them immediately, we'll take contact details and come back to you. So I'll just hand over to Ingrid shortly. Just a little bit of brief information on Ingrid. Ingrid works with me in Glasgow. She's an immigration and employment law specialist and has had many years of experience acting for mainly large employers and employees alike in contentious and non-contentious employment and immigration work. So I think everybody's muted, but if I can just make sure that everybody remains muted throughout, that would be great. So Ingrid, over to you. Thanks very much.
Many thanks, Claire, for that introduction, and good morning to you all. I hope the ease down of lockdown 3.0 is treating you well and that you're all in fine spirits today. I'm not going to lie that the last lockdown was indeed a struggle for many, and speaking to many of my clients, contacts and friends and family, I know I'm probably not alone in having that feeling, but it's been a tough one for a variety of reasons, but there is now hope on the horizon and we can see life opening up again. So I am genuinely delighted that you've chosen to join us this morning for what should be an informative, reassuring and enjoyable session. As Claire says, I'm a partner at the national law firm Weightmans, and I head up the employment pensions immigration team here in Scotland. And when I initially considered what to talk about this morning, I had done a similar talk perhaps a month or 2 ago where we were discussing planning for the end, and I hadn't perhaps appreciated how doomsday that perhaps sounded. But naturally, what we're here to address today is the end of this period of adaptation, the end of hopefully how COVID has impacted how we live and work, and the end of what perhaps just hasn't worked for so many for so long now. If I could have the next slide, please, Alan. Thank you. So the purpose of today's discussion is just to go through, I suppose, planning for change, what that might look like, what else you should be considering, and how you would make those changes. And again, we've got a summary. And as I've said, from my own perspective, as an employment solicitor, professional life has certainly been demanding. It's been busy and hugely reactive at times. At the start, we were all getting our head around the furlough scheme. remote working overnight, and some form of return to the workplace last year, and then for that to be taken away. So ourselves as a firm and our clients and contacts have had to adapt enormously during this time. And in fairness, I think we've done a really, really good job at doing that. However, the focus of today's discussion is very much around looking forward and planning ahead. Just last month, I was co-hosting a construction roundtable with a group of my fellow partners, and one of the key themes that kept jumping out was the need to plan, and more importantly, to plan early. So today, the plan is to go through what steps I consider are important in preparing for the next stage. And with the vaccine programme making great progress, and the movement and some normality creeping into our lives, we shouldn't lose sight of how best we can use our time now for preparing what's yet to come in the upcoming months. Next slide, please, Alan. So for me, what I have been recommending and advising businesses to do at the moment is really the due diligence aspect. This is the first step in my view. If you have or haven't already done this, or you've done this at some point last year, I think now is another really good time to regroup and consider certain aspects here. So I think firstly, I think it's a really good time now to go to your clients, go to your service users, and really understand how they think you've adapted or not from the last in the last 12 to 13 months. I think sometimes businesses can really focus on their staff and their stakeholders, which is a great thing. But I think in terms of how they operate internally, it's still a great time now to understand how your clients have considered how you've adapted. Because what you should also remember is some of the changes that you have made or you have considered perhaps temporary may now be an ongoing expectation for your clients or your service users now. So it's a really good time to identify what they are now and to identify what perhaps also hasn't worked. For example, we've seen in the retail sector particularly, those that had a really strong or a presence or have subsequently invested in an e-commerce platform have really managed to adapt well. We've seen it with restaurants, cafes, with a takeaway option in terms of that was a workaround, a temporary fix, but I think many businesses will see that as an ongoing business model going forward. So I think it's a really good opportunity now to consider what's worked and what you think would work going forward, and not necessarily considering this as a temporary measure that you've had to implement. So engage now, show you that you care and you have the value in the relationship with your clients to reach out and understand the true value of the service that you have added and how best to deliver that going forward. In respect of your staff, when we conducted it was just an online survey in our last talk, I think it was 36% of businesses hadn't engaged or implemented any form of engagement survey with staff. And what I mean by this is you really need to understand what your staff's expectations are and also engage with them to see how everything's going. I'm sure many businesses have done that already, but I think it can sometimes be left with the team managers or just regular emails or forms of communication online. But I think now is a really good time to understand how your workforce has coped, is coping, what they foresee in the future. For example, within Weightmans, I know we've done staff engagement surveys, we've done questionnaires, and in particular with staff engagement, I think what businesses should understand is that there are learning points to always make, and that this is a really good opportunity to see what learning points there are. What we noticed as a firm that there were, for example, differences in how engaged or mood or the general atmosphere or the culture, and it could depend on the stage in the career the particular individual was in or the regional responses. So it might be something that you do anyway, but again, I think it's a good time to understand now for planning purposes. And in terms of a questionnaire, have you done a questionnaire? Have you engaged with staff about what their expectations are about returning to work? Have you really tried to flesh out how staff feel about coming back into an office or workplace environment? I think there's a huge confidence piece here that will naturally stem from risk assessments, effective communication. But what I'm seeing and hearing from a lot of our clients and contacts is the idea of some form of hybrid or blended working pattern going forward. I know myself, when we started working from home, it, all the time, it just really wasn't for me to have that. I like going into the office. I like seeing my colleagues. I like the environment and the atmosphere and the culture that we have within the firm. But what I've noticed is that individuals and employees have just got used to this way of working, and they've adapted. It's perhaps given them a bit more work-life balance. It's not affected productivity or how engaged others are. So I think, again, this is a really good time to really understand, engage in some form of questionnaire about returning to work, because you want to make sure you are on the same page as your staff and vice versa. You need to understand if there's any disconnect there that you need to address. I appreciate as well, in some businesses, the hybrid working or more flexible working patterns or being in and out the office may work for some particular departments or individuals or job roles more so than they would others. And again, it's not kind of finger in the air stuff and just think what will work. I think this is a really good time to get really informed information directly from your staff about what they expect, because if that's not in line with what the business foresees and how they will be opening up or how they expect individuals to return to work, there is a communication piece to be done there. There are conversations that may be challenging. So again, you need to be aware of what those conversations are likely to look like, what are the potential barriers, and how you envisage managing those conversations. In respect of stakeholders, again, it's worth touching base because there might be slight inconsistencies or disjointed views. Again, from speaking with clients and contacts and also family and friends, there is a general concern that stakeholders just assume that everything will just go back to normal once we start opening up and the restrictions are eased and lifted altogether. And you've got to be able to have a very informed and valuable conversation with your stakeholders, and that's why you need to be aware from the due diligence and feedback from your clients and staff to be armed with those conversations when you are discussing any sort of challenging perceptions or objectives that stakeholders may consider are likely to just basically be reintroduced in terms of pre-COVID working arrangements. You need to be understanding what it is or why you can't go back to how it was before in order for you to have those discussions with stakeholders. And then what I've put there is that there's a blend. What you've got then is like direct information from your clients, staff and stakeholders about what their expectations are, what has or hasn't worked, and you should be drawing from that intel and planning based on what those expectations are, what will work for the business, and manage those expectations going from there effectively. This is a really good exercise to go through for several reasons. It's on everyone's radar that potential change or return to work planning or strategizing is underway. That's key. You want individuals to feel like they know what's going on and that something is happening, and it's not just a case of flicking a switch and we're all going back to how it was before. Individuals will feel a sense of engagement. You will get more buy-in if they feel they have a say, and you know that there is an ear for them that is listening to them effectively. You'll be getting great intel directly from your groups, and it allows you to formulate a plan and strategize with genuine data and information about what should be going forward in terms of how your operations will continue and how you will continue to deliver. Again, it helps you to understand if any adaptation is expected, required, and or needs to be managed. And I think that's a key area from the client's perspective as well. I think in the way that we've really tried to adapt to continue to deliver exceptional services to our clients, they will expect that going forward. Again, what does that look like? Is that possible? If so, how does that actually look? And again, in terms of your forecasting your timescales, if there are any material significant changes to how you've worked before, now, or how you are likely to work in the future, you need to kickstart that process as early as possible to, again, avoid losing valuable time, avoid any sort of financial implications there, and making sure you're ready to get cracking once the doors are open fully. Next slide, please, Alan. Thank you. So in terms of what changes are you likely to make, again, I've addressed the slight nuances that we have to deal with, because I think employees are now probably used to this way of working. So you're going to have the camp that don't want to come back to how it was. You'll have the camp that want some form of hybrid, and you also have the camp that say, now I want to come back to completely how it was before. I can't see why I would continue in this fashion. So how are you as a business going to deal with those three different camps of employees or staff that want these different ways of working? Are you capable of facilitating that? And if not, why? You want to make sure you're not losing any form of culture or collaborative approach or value that you've had before. So if there is to be some form of hybrid working continuation from working from home, how will you ensure you don't lose that culture, collaboration and engagement from your staff? And I know in particular, when we're not in the workplace environment, individuals are without a doubt, missing out on that learning through osmosis, especially those more recently recruited or junior members of staff. There's a real loss of opportunity there and that way of learning. So again, you need to have a plan that will involve keeping in contact and having valued engagement with all members of staff, including those more junior or recent recruits, if you are likely to continue working more remotely going forward as well. So again, you can draw on what you've fleshed out in your due diligence exercise. And again, what is it that your employees want to come back to? Is it pre-COVID? Is it hybrid? And I think from my own perspective, I know that when I was starting out in my legal career as a trainee and as an NQ, I without a doubt learned from other partners, other associates, other solicitors, how they dealt with clients, how they dealt with colleagues. You may even pick up things that you think, well, I won't be doing that because it doesn't suit your character, or it just doesn't suit your way of dealing with it. But you learn and you are exposed to other ways of working and how individuals interact effectively and how they deal with clients and deal with providing legal advice. It will be the same for individuals within your business. So again, if you haven't already got a plan in place for continuing with remote working, I think that's one of the biggest risk areas for business in terms of retention of talent. So that's something that you should be planning towards if you haven't already started. I've put up here terms and conditions of employment. Now this seems like a fairly basic aspect, but what I've noticed as well, and I've assisted a number of clients with this, is a lot of clients have taken this time to really review what their terms and conditions of employment look like and what their policies and procedures offer them. And the reason they've done that is because don't get me wrong, we've gone through a global pandemic. It's unprecedented times. Fingers crossed, we're not likely to go through something like this ever again. But that's not to say there might be some form of other issue that would require similar requirements or adaptations or flexibility. And what a lot of clients realized was that the current terms and conditions didn't give them the flexibility or the ability to maneuver in a particular way to keep business running without huge risk. And what I mean by that is, for example, most construction businesses would, for example, have layoff or short time working, as with manufacturing. But short time and layoff working isn't necessarily what others would consider a standard term of and condition of a contract. But now you're seeing more businesses looking to have contractual terms that allow for layoff or short time working, because if you impose something like that without the contractual right to do so, that is just simply a breach of contract and you've not really got a leg to stand on unless the employee agrees. So again, now's a really good time to understand, well, how flexible are your terms? Do you need to consider making them more flexible in terms of the core understanding or requirements of the role that the individual carries out, the hours, the duties, the mobility clause in terms of if you need them to be at different locations, go to different departments? Do you have that flex in your terms and conditions at the moment? And if not, is that something you should be addressing right now? Because again, you might need that flexibility going forward, not just because we've had this pandemic, but because it's now something that's worked. It makes your team more efficient, it makes your team a bit more collaborative, and it provides an area to enhance multi-skilled individuals or talent within the business. And again, that's something I think a lot of clients, and I know for sure that I've assisted a number of clients with tweaking their terms and conditions of employment as well. In terms of, I've said their talent pool and the immigration considerations, that again, this is simply about planning and what it is that you need to consider, because employees who, as we know, out with the European Union previously, they were subject to different regimes in terms of recruitment and sponsorship, whereas now with Brexit and the new points-based system, businesses have to make sure they have a sponsor license, and you have to ensure that the individual who you might wish to issue a certificate of sponsorship to would meet the criteria in terms of the skills, the salary, under the new points-based system. Now, the other aspect that needs to be addressed here is also having EU members, EU workers here. Now, prior to obviously Brexit, there was no issue. We had the free movement of individuals and working, but that's all changed now. So if you haven't already done this, obviously members or EU workers that were here in the country before the end of 2020, so long as they've signed up and applied for settlement, then they can remain, and that's fine. But I think some businesses, though it's not the obligation of the business to ensure individuals do this, I still think it's a good opportunity, if you haven't already done this, to be signposting the requirement to apply for settlement if they want to remain working lawfully within the UK. So again, if you haven't already done that, then please ensure that you have some form of process in place, because obviously employers must ensure employees have the right to work in the UK, and you have a duty to prevent illegal working. So again, the penalties can be substantial, and there is 5 years imprisonment and or an unlimited fine. So again, it's something that businesses should be making sure they are adhering to at the moment. In terms of the settlement scheme, what we would say and what we have been advising clients is to make sure that you've adopted some form of stage approach in terms of sending out firm-wide communications highlighting that basically the free movement ended at the end of 2020, and that and provide information on the EU settlement scheme, including the deadline to apply for this. So again, there's a lot there on the Home Office website and the government website, but again, if that's something that you feel that you haven't addressed and you wish to address, because there are particular nuances with and pitfalls in respect of race and nationality discrimination that you need to be aware of, and how you actually implement these checks. So again, if that's something you need assistance with, you can naturally get in touch about those. If I could go to the next screen, please, Alan. So I've said this, what else should you be considering, but probably this is what else you could be considering, I suppose, really, because there are a number of aspects that businesses are looking into at the moment. We've all seen the Pimlico Plumbers managing director hit the headlines with the no jab, no job policy. We've got compulsory testing in some businesses. There's some discussion around wearable tech. So again, I'll go through all of these. And this is very much a discussion point around what you could consider, whether it's, whether others within your sector or industry are actually carrying out these tests, because there's a lot of questions around, can employers insist on staff undergoing temperature checks or regular COVID tests? Can employers make it mandatory for staff to wear masks whilst at work? Can employers insist on staff being vaccinated? And there's no simple yes or no answer, quite frankly, and I'm sure you're not surprised to hear me say that, but these are natural considerations for businesses at the moment. So in terms of what options are available to businesses who want to introduce mandatory testing, obviously COVID's had a massive impact on businesses in terms of operational difficulties, and many employers have had to adapt because of high numbers of staff reporting sick or requiring to self-isolate in line with government guidance. So I think a lot of businesses have looked to increase what the so-called COVID security by introducing regular mandatory testing. And generally speaking, an employer cannot force an employee to submit to a COVID test, but there are options available to businesses who want to introduce such testing. And the key thing naturally would be, firstly, as a first step, is effective communication with workers. That should always be your starting point when seeking to introduce a new policy, and especially when it affects all staff. You should undertake a consultation process with all workers, and where applicable, a recognised trade union regarding the proposal of any new policy, and again invite feedback and get that engagement from workers as to their perspective and their suggestions around the policy being proposed as implemented. Again, consulting with the workforce in this way gives you an opportunity to explain the rationale and the benefits to everyone of a mandatory testing regime, and to encourage buy-in from staff. Now, I think as advisors and as businesses, I think we've been very focused on those who might resist or might not. But actually what we're finding is most employees and individuals want to do this because they want to know, and they want to encourage others to get involved, because they want to know that when they come back to work, it's as safe as reasonably possible. So again, I think we are dealing with the minority here, but as we all know, the minority can create a huge amount of noise, time and effort. So again, it's about managing that to have those incidents minimized or dealt with effectively. We've had a lot of questions and queries about what do we do if workers refuse to be tested. So for me, whenever I've given advice about this, firstly, your key thing is what have you implemented in terms of your policy and your process? What have you said as to why this is required within the business? What also have you said will be the outcome of non-compliance, so that individuals are given fair notice of what that looks like? And you should also consider alternatives to taking formal action. Could this individual be redeployed somewhere else in the organisation? Can they work separately from other colleagues? Could they carry out their role safely from home or be placed on furlough at the moment? Again, you have to be seen to consider all these differences and all these alternatives before anything else is taken on a more formal basis. But again, as we've had to advise, what happens if there isn't anything else? What else can we do? So effectively, then you're kind of dealt with in terms of if testing is mission critical and absolutely required to the safe returning of your organisation, then again, it's effectively, is your request or instruction reasonable and lawful? And therefore, if their refusal or failure to comply, that could be effectively a disciplinary issue that you could then take forward if needs be. But I would absolutely make sure you seek legal advice on this, because there are a few cases cropping up at ET level. We've not had an appeal yet level, but there are a few cases coming up on this, and it's very much an evolving area for businesses, and it will no doubt be a prevalent area going forward as well. So we'll naturally keep you updated as and when those updates take place. In terms of again, we're going back to the asymptomatic testing, just to make you aware, I don't intend on going into the real detail of this, but there is government guidance which was issued, I think either, I can't remember, it was end of January or start of February, But if employers or businesses are looking to carry out private asymptomatic testing, there is government guidance that I would recommend that you consider, it specifically addresses things like what employers need to consider before deciding to test staff. Do you have a reporting pathway to your local health protection team? You will need that. How will you decide which test to select and procure, and how do you intend to collect and communicate test results to staff? Again, these are all aspects that are covered by the guidance, and if you haven't considered that already, if you are looking to implement asymptomatic testing, then I would absolutely recommend that you review that. Moving to the no jab, no job, we've written a few articles around this because a lot of businesses have just assumed that they can just say, look, if you don't get your vaccine, you can't come back to work. And I can't say that that's going to be an approach that will be hugely well received by tribunals unless employers can justify taking that approach. So at present, vaccinations are not mandatory, and employers don't have freestanding legal rights to compel workers to be vaccinated. And the guidance at the moment and the advice is that, we should be supporting staff who wish to get the vaccine, and we should also listen to their concerns and maintain good communication if they refuse, and really understand why that, also I suppose what their grounds of refusal are and why. Businesses can rely on health and safety legislation in terms of, for example, the Health and Safety at Work Act, that imposes a duty of care on employers and an obligation to make workplaces as safe as reasonably possible, and a duty upon employees to cooperate in achieving that objective. So if an employer or a business was requiring their workforce to have the vaccination, you could argue that you've issued a reasonable management instruction pursuant to their legal obligations to minimise risk. And again, therefore, a failure to follow that reasonable instruction could actually then be escalated and managed in a disciplinary matter if required. As with the testing, what I would say about the no jab, no job is there are risk areas with that, because there may be grounds, or say for disability, sex and maternity, age, religion, GDPR, even human rights arguments that individuals could rely on as to why they don't want the vaccine, or why they don't want to feel the need to have it before coming back to work. So again, you need to be aware of all of that and how that impacts the business. And if you do wish to have a kind of no jab, no job policy implemented, you need to be really clear. You need to be really clear on why you as a business, as a sector, in your industry, why that is vital, why there's no workaround, because if it's not a proportionate way of achieving a particular aim, then you're going to come across huge challenges there. And you would have a whole consultation process to implement that policy, make sure everyone understands it, why it's there, and again, importantly, what would happen if there was non-compliance. The other area that we are getting more discussion around at the moment, and I don't know where you guys are perhaps in this discussion, or if you're even entering into such conversations or considerations at this stage, but there have been some discussions around wearable technology, and as the UK vaccine rollout accelerates, we are seeing a return to offices and the pre-pandemic places of work. So employers face the challenge of creating safe, COVID-secure conditions for staff, and it can be a difficult balancing act. And staff awareness of employers' obligations is also growing too. So again, it's that confidence piece again. What are you doing for me to make it safe for me to come back to work? What are you doing to make me feel comfortable about coming back to work? And so there's a huge, again, communication and informative piece around whether your safety measures, your risk assessments at the workplace are sufficient, especially if those are unable to work from home, have to come back in. So again, we think that some employers are going to be looking into technology as a solution for that. So wearable tech, it's not it's not new. There are many businesses around the world that have used tracking devices to monitor everything from employee stress levels, sleeping habits, but again, harnessing their potential to protect safety, health and safety, could become a staple of the future world of work. The BBC, for example, recently introduced new proximity devices to aid social distancing on its premises, which effectively buzz to alert wearers if they come within 2 meters of other people. So again, I'm not saying that this is compulsory. It's definitely a trend on the rise, but it is something that is having deep discussion within certain sectors and businesses. And I don't know if it's something that you as a business consider necessary, or is a must-have, a would like. And so wearables or work tech does come with its own challenges, and I think many employees will instinctively be uncomfortable about having their activity monitored in this way. They might see it unnecessary, they might see it intrusive or unreasonable, especially if they think that data could be used in a disciplinary context. So again, in order to alleviate any of those concerns, should you wish to implement something like this, I think the business's approach to communication can make or break how the introduction of wearable tech is received. It's key to reassure employees that its use is reasonable and it's open and honest about precisely what data you'll collect and when and how that information will be stored. And that will be, again, key in being as transparent as possible about why you've implemented this or why you have it within the workplace. So again, critically, if a business ever intended to use the data as part of a disciplinary case to answer for an employee, for example, if the individual did not maintain social distancing in the workplace, you've got to be able to guarantee its accuracy and be explicit in defining how data collected from wearables could trigger a disciplinary action. But you also shouldn't be a slave to this data. If an individual did breach social data, is there a reason for it? You need to understand that you've still got to exercise reasonable discretion and act within the range of reasonable responses, which is effectively the legal test for any form of disciplinary dismissal in effect. So again, you need to be clear with all of that. So with all of that I've said about, the testing, the vaccinations and wearable tech, I've put a separate box for non-compliance. And why I've done that is because many businesses are really good. They're great at implementing policies. They're clear, they're concise, you know what to expect. However, where they fall short is identifying what will happen if individuals don't comply. And that's a key area, because if there is any action to be taken on the back of any form of non-compliance, you need that in your policy or in some shape or form. And the other aspect is enforceability. Again, it's all very well having all written out there, but if managers, senior management team don't live by what's stated in the policy, they don't enforce it, they don't pull individuals up when they see there's an element of non-compliance, it's not going to be worth the paper it's written on. You need the backing of how it's enforced, how it's all delivered, and how it's all implemented. So again, that's a key aspect for anything that you may wish to implement or introduce in the next coming months. Next slide, please, Alan. So I'll just go through in terms of summary about what you need to consider in the next coming months if you haven't already done that, or maybe you wish to revisit any planning or strategizing that you've already done. Effectively, be clear on the basics. What are the changes that you want to make? How significant or material are they? Again, why are you making them? When do you intend to make them? And how do you intend to implement them? I always say to businesses and clients, you need that. You need the basics, because if you don't have the answers to them, they are naturally going to be the questions you're asked by your staff or any pushback, especially the why are you making them? Why are you doing this? Why do we need this? You need to be very clear on all of that. And again, look to your contracts. If you already have the contractual provision there already, great. Rely on that. Employees, because it's not been enforced over the last few years, doesn't mean that you don't have the right to rely upon it now. So again, look into that. But what I would say, again, for engagement and buy-in, is no matter whether it's in your contracts or not at this stage, I would always recommend a period of consultation. I'm not saying you have to go through months and months of it, but what I would still say, there still should be a communication piece about the basics, the what, the how, the why, the when, because individuals need to feel informed accordingly before they would either agree or understand what's going to take place. And lastly, what I would say is, if you've got pushback or you don't have the contractual terms and conditions to rely on to make these particular changes, then what you are dealing with is a period of consultation about the basics before you implement them. And if employees don't agree to these changes, then those of you who've dealt with redundancies or restructuring, again, what you may be familiar with is the terms of or process of dismissal and re-engage, which is you would have to set clearly a period of consultation to go through what the changes are, why you're doing them and when they'll be implemented. Have a period of consultation where you get feedback, you may adjust what you're proposing, but make clear that if we don't get an agreement by a particular date, subject to everything that's been consulted upon, the business may be considering dismissing and then re-engaging on the new terms that you're now proposing. Again, if those of you with employees or individuals who are refusing to do this, and you might be affecting 20 or more dismissals within a 90-day period, you're into collective consultation territory. You need to make sure you get that absolutely right, because the legislation is very prescriptive and each individual could make a claim of a 90-day protective award, which is 90 days gross pay per employee for any breach of the collective consultation regulations and legislation, I should say. So again, there's a lot there in terms of whether or not that's triggered. And I appreciate that's kind of a whistle-stop tour, but there's a lot to consider now. But I think we've got, now's a really good time to have a think about what your business should look like, or how you want it to look like when everyone is coming back. And hopefully that's given you a bit of food for thought about how to go about it and what your potential challenges are, and given you some idea of what to consider going forward. So as Claire mentioned, more than happy to take some questions if there are any, and hopefully you found that helpful. And again, naturally, if there aren't any questions right now, then more than happy to follow up by email if you would prefer. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid. That was really helpful. I can see we've got a few questions that have come through, and oh, there you are, you're on screen now. And I'm not sure if you can see them, Ingrid, but I'll just read them out, and then if you want to address them, that would be great. So the first question we've got is from Claire Moran. Is it a legal requirement to provide IT equipment for employees if they choose to work at home, and you provide IT equipment in the office space? You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Rookie mistake. The answer is, if you've agreed for them to work from home, then you should be providing the equipment for them to do so. If you would do it in the office, I don't see why there would be any grounds to say we wouldn't provide it for you to work from home. I know as a firm what we did, we provided everything for employees to work. If you really want individuals to be able to work to their full capacity in a home environment or remotely, then you should be providing them the equipment to do that.
Make sure I'm off mute for the next one. Okay, so Debbie Farrell, if you're looking to make the option for home working available, I think we've just addressed that. Things like office chairs, chair and that sort of thing. Yeah, I think you've just got to, my view. Hi Debbie, nice to see that you're here. Yes, I think here it's all about the ergonomic equipment that you're required to provide, and there would be a risk assessment for home working and working remotely as well. So I think if there was an issue with the chair that's provided and the risk assessment suggests that there is an issue, then I think there is potentially an obligation to provide a comfortable working environment if you are now accepting that this is a working environment going forward.
I can see we've got one from Brian as well.
Yeah.
Can I restrict? So the question, sorry, for those who can't see this, is that we work in a customer-facing environment. Most of our staff are young and will be last to get the vaccine. So can you restrict shift work to those who are vaccinated on the grounds of customer safety? So what you could do is put that, you could offer that as a proposal and see how that lands. And if individuals are willing to agree to it, then that's fine. But then you need to then address any concerns individuals would have about not getting a shift because they're not vaccinated. So what are the reasons, and understanding that. Again, it's that the whole issue of the vaccine passport or not bringing people in back to work. And it's not just, again, for customer safety, it's like individuals as well, because I think on the last talk that I did, there were members of staff that were very much with my colleagues aren't vaccinated, I don't want them back at work. So again, I think the first thing to do is have the conversation, plant the seed, see how that lands, and then take it from there.
Okay, thanks. I think that's all the questions we've had through whilst you've been doing your presentation. So unless there's any other questions, then I'll bring the session to a close. If anybody does want any clarification on anything that we've raised today, or has any other questions that crop up and you think about once we've left the webinar, then our details were on the screen at the start. Alan, I don't know if you could just put that first screen back up, please. We'll also aim to send out some, thanks very much. We'll also aim at to send out some follow-up information just to those people that have attended, just with some sort of bullet points to cover what we've discussed today. So in closing, I'd like to thank Ingrid again and thank Alan and his colleagues at the Chamber for working with us on this one. I know that there are many issues that we've all faced over the last 12 months, and I think that most people are weathering the storm. And with the weather, sun shining today, and some good news coming on the news, and things that COVID is not the main news agenda every night when we turn on the TV now, or if it is, it seems to be slightly more positive. Let's hope that we do get back to some sort of normality. But thanks to everybody for joining us today, and everybody stay safe. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.